Welcome to Cyber Bytes, your weekly dose in the latest in cybersecurity news. I'm your host, Edwin Kwan, and this episode's stories all point to a common theme that we're seeing more often in 2026. The gap between what organizations think their controls are doing and what's actually in practice. Whether it's multi-factor authentication that doesn't fire, privacy features that don't fully protect users, or AI systems that trust the wrong inputs, attackers are consistently finding those blind spots and exploiting them at scale. The numbers behind some of these incidents are worth paying attention to because these are no longer edge cases. They're becoming normal operating conditions. Let's start with a large-scale password spray attack that's targeting Microsoft Azure environments. And this one is a pretty good example where having MFA in place doesn't automatically mean you're covered. Security firm Huntress tracked more than 81 million login attempts over a 2-week period last month. Ultimately, this led to 78 compromised accounts across 64 organizations. Now, that might look like a very low success rate, but the scale here is what's really important. When the attackers automated this at this level, even a fraction of a percent becomes meaningful across dozens of business. Now, what makes this attack particularly important is how it bypassed MFA. The attackers weren't brute forcing passwords in the traditional sense. They were replaying known credentials from previous breaches and using a legacy authentication method called the resource owner password credential flow. That flow is deprecated in modern OAuth standards, specifically because it doesn't support MFA. So it allowed direct credential submission without triggering the extra verification that the organizations relied on. Now, here's where it gets a lot more uncomfortable. Huntress found that many of the affected organizations did have MFA configured through conditional access policies. The issue was how those policies were scoped. Some only applied MFA to specific applications like your admin portals, leaving other entry points such as the Azure CLI unprotected. Others limited MFA to certain user groups, meaning standard user accounts became the path of least resistance. There were also cases where MFA was only enforced for non-trusted locations, and inconsistencies in geolocation meant attackers can direct the traffic using a VPN, and it sometimes gets treated as local and therefore trusted. The takeaway is that MFA is only as strong as its coverage. If there's a path that doesn't enforce it, attackers will find it. Huntress also noted a 155-fold increase in credential spray activity across their customer base in the last 6 months. And this tells us that this isn't a one-off activity. It's a sustained shift in the attacker's behavior. For most organizations, this means revisiting your conditional access policies with the focus on full coverage, including legacy authentication paths that are easy to overlook. Now, moving on to our next story, we're going to talk about Apple and a service that a lot of people assume is reliable. It's a privacy feature built into their mainstream platform. So Apple has this Hide My Email service, which is designed to let users create alias email addresses. And it turns out it has reportedly been leaking real email addresses for over a year, despite being disclosed to Apple back in mid-2025. In testing, the researcher found a 100% success rate in uncovering the real email behind the alias. The issue here isn't just a technical flaw, though I would say that that's pretty significant on its own. It's the timeline. Apple acknowledged the issue, indicated fixes were in progress, and at one point claimed that it had been resolved. But independent verification showed that the vulnerability was still exploitable. And as of this reporting, a confirmed fix hasn't yet been delivered. From a risk perspective, this matters because email addresses are often the key that links to a much larger set of personal data. There are numerous publicly accessible databases that can pivot from an email address to phone numbers, physical addresses, and other identifying details. For users relying on aliasing for safety, not just convenience, that creates a real exposure. It turns what should be a protective control into something closer to a false sense of security. For organizations, particularly those advising staff or customers on privacy practices, it's a reminder that built-in platform features still need independent validation. Up next is a quick update in the AI space that has operational implications for teams using these tools. Anthropic has announced it will restore access to its Claude Faber model after a temporary suspension tied to US export controls. The suspension earlier in June cut off access for users outside of the United States, including those here in Australia, and they did that with very little warning. What's interesting is that only Faber is being restored. The more advanced Mythos models remains restricted due to national security concerns, particularly around its demonstrated ability to perform offensive cyber tasks at a relatively high success rate. Reports indicate that it could successfully break into systems in around 73% of test scenarios conducted by the UK's AI Security Institute. Our next story is about Microsoft, and the company has introduced enhanced bot protection for Teams meeting. And this reflects a shift in how attackers are approaching collaboration platforms. As remote and hybrid work has become standard, tools like Teams have effectively become part of the attack surface. We've seen cases where meetings are infiltrated to capture sensitive discussions, record sessions without consent, or gather intelligence for follow-on phishing campaigns. The challenge Microsoft is addressing here is distinguishing between legitimate and malicious automation. As not all bots are bad, many organizations rely on automated transcription, recording, and accessibility tools. Blocking all non-human participants would break legitimate workflows, so instead, Microsoft is moving towards behavioral analysis, looking at how participants join and interact with meetings rather than just whether they have valid credentials. This is a more nuanced approach, and I think it's very necessary. Credentials-based access alone is no longer a reliable signal of trust. If an attacker gains access to a meeting link or account, they can appear legitimate at first glance. Behavior indicators provide an additional layer to detect anomalies that static controls miss. And now we're off to our last story. One of the more forward-looking threats this week involves AI agents and something called indirect prompt injection. Researchers at Zscaler have documented active campaigns where malicious websites embed hidden instructions designed to manipulate AI systems that are browsing or retrieving content on behalf of users. AI agents are increasingly being used to automate tasks like searching for documentation, summarizing content, or interacting with web services. These agents interpret the content they retrieve as part of their working context. Attackers are exploiting that by embedding instructions within web pages that are invisible to humans but readable by machines. In one campaign, attackers create a fake developer library and use search engine optimization to make their site appear in relevant search results. Hidden within the page were instructions telling the AI agent to pay a small fee to obtain an API key. The instructions were placed in structured metadata fields, which many AI systems treat as high confidence input, and they are hidden visually using CSS so a human reviewer wouldn't see them. The issue here is that the AI isn't being hacked in the traditional sense. It's being persuaded, much like humans would be in a phishing attack. The difference is that the manipulation happens at machine speed and scale, and often without visibility to the person who's deployed the agent. Zscaler tested 26 different large language models and found that several failed to correctly identify or resist these attacks, which tells us that this is no longer something that's theoretical, it's actually already in real-world conditions. Now, for organizations building or deploying AI agents, this changes how web content needed to be treated. It's no longer just data to be consumed, it's now an active attack surface. Controls that work for humans, like visual inspection or user awareness training, don't translate to automated systems. Defenses need to include input validation, strict separation of duties from retrieved content, and policies that limit what actions an agent can take based on external inputs. Across all these stories today, the common thread is misalignment between expectations and reality. MFA that doesn't cover every path, privacy features that don't fully protect identity, AI systems that trust unverified inputs, and collaboration tools that assumes participants are who they appear to be. Attackers are not necessarily breaking systems in new ways. They're finding the edges of how those systems are configured and operating in gaps. For security teams, the focus continues to shift from deploying controls to validating them. It's not enough to have MFA, AI safeguards, or privacy features in place. The question is whether they behave as expected under real-world conditions, including edge cases and legacy pathways. That validation step is where many of these incidents could have been prevented. And that's it for this week's Cyber Bytes. I'm Edwin Kwan, and I'll see you next time.